Hello, I'm Mark Keane. I'm a Microsoft Azure architect for Vigilant IT based in Sydney, Australia. This presentation is a recording of the same content that myself and my colleague Steve Hosking delivered at a user group meetup situated at DDLS on Wednesday, July 13, 2016. We'll go through explaining what Azure Stack is versus Azure Public, which many of us are familiar with. We'll go through a behind-the-scenes look at Azure Stack in detail. Windows past to present. Let's turn the clock back and reminisce through the history of Microsoft. A quick recap on the history and evolution of Windows Server. Server for the masses. Windows NT 4, released 1986, and Windows NT stands for New Technology. Enterprise servers. Windows 2000, RTM, December 1999, and Windows Server 2003, released April 2003. Data center servers, Windows Server 2008, RTM February 4, 2008, and Windows Server 2012, RTM August 1, 2012. And cloud servers, Windows Server 2016. Let's run through a quick comparison of Microsoft Azure in relation to Azure Stack. Azure Stack is not generally available yet. It'll be expected to be released mid-2017. Azure Stack is limited scale, it's up to the provider as to their locations, but at this stage, Azure Public have announced 35 regions globally, more than any other public cloud provider. Azure Stack might be more favourable in terms of data sovereignty due to a potential local presence. Azure Stack also supports Azure Resource Manager only. Azure Stack services and resources on offer may be limited in comparison to Azure Public. It's up to the Azure Stack provider's discretion what they make available to tenants. And it seems like Azure Stack providers could offer an SLA on a single virtual machine by making use of back-end live migrations to remove the upgrade domain. As for the web portals to manage Azure Stack, there is no difference. We have the Azure Public portal, and we have the Azure Stack portal. It looks the same because it literally is the same. The only differences that you might notice is a change in logo at the top left. Also, the lack of menu items on the left-hand menu. This is because currently Azure Stack at Technical Preview only supports a limited number of resource providers. However, in time to come, as more Azure Stack resource providers come online, this will see both portals look even more exact. But it's also up to the Azure Stack provider's discretion as to what resource providers and services they make available to tenants. Let's peel off the top layer of Azure and dive under the covers to break open the architecture of what makes up Azure. We're taking a look at the architecture behind the scenes of Azure Stack Technical Preview 1. This diagram on the right depicts a single physical server. All components of Azure Stack TP1 run on a single host. The host has to meet a fairly high specification in terms of CPU, disks, and memory in order just to run Azure Stack Technical Preview. The darker grey boxes indicate virtual machines running on the host. The web portal and admin tools get access via the control plane, which sits on the portal VM. All your normal Azure tooling, including the Azure CLI, works with Azure Stack. Behind the scenes in Azure Stack Technical Preview 1 is just a series of 10 virtual machines sitting on Hyper-V. This might sound simple, but it's a massive power and endless possibilities of virtualization. A single Hyper-V host, 10 virtual machines, and some hardcore virtual networking make up a full Azure environment. Something that wouldn't have been possible years ago. The networking component of Azure Stack also sits on the same physical host and is also virtualized. You can see that Azure Stack virtual networking is fairly complex and looks extremely intense in the first instance. However, it's architected like this for very good reasons to be secure enough to support public tenants. It's all based on Windows Server 2016 with new networking technologies such as software load balancing, border gateway control, and VXLAN. There is also a bunch of subnets and network routes for traffic to flow throughout. And now we'll give a quick refresher on Azure Resource Manager. Azure Resource Manager is nothing new and it has been around since Azure Service Management classic days. However, it took a back step and was not really in the forefront as to where it is today. Azure Resource Manager comprises of resource groups and resources. By using resource groups, it's a way of logically grouping resources for the purposes of delegation of security or for the purposes of grouping resources into logical applications. For example, domain controllers, which is part of Active Directory, you can add these servers to one resource group, then have a virtual network in its own separate resource group. This logically segments resources into logical grouping of resources while separating delegation of permissions. One of the biggest changes in Azure Resource Manager in comparison to Azure Service Management Classic is the fact that the virtual network is now mandatory. Azure Resource Manager also brings with it other features. It gives you new and better deployment options. You can deploy resources in Azure using JSON templates and leverage scale sets and parallel deployment. Role-based access control allows you to granularly delegate access to people, either from an entire subscription or access to a specific Azure resource. The cloud service doesn't exist anymore. With Azure Resource Manager, instead the cloud service is broken apart into different network resources to allow for more control to make fine-grained changes at any time. Resource tagging is for the benefit of billing, so certain resources stand out more easily, making them much more easier to be tracked. Going from Azure Service Management on the left-hand side to Azure Resource Manager on the right-hand side, there's like an explosion of the cloud service. On the left-hand side, we have Azure Classic with a limited number of components. On the right-hand side, we have Azure Resource Manager, and you'll notice that the cloud service has opened itself up to expose all of its functionalities as separate resources. Here is a complete picture of all the network resources in Azure Stack, created using the exact same methods and tools as Azure Public, Azure Templates, PowerShell, and the Marketplace. When selling anything, you sell on benefits and value and not features. The values and benefits of Azure Resource Manager include greater control. Resources are loosely coupled and can be controlled in a granular fashion for management flexibility. Role-based access control allows for fine-grained delegation of permissions from the top down. Easier management and deployment using JSON templates in a declarative model. Repeatable deployment similar to desired state configuration. And a vast array of management tools. This is all available in Azure Stack. Services in Azure Public. These are all the services available in Azure Public. It's the entire offering of services. In comparison, there are services in Azure Stack. The current release of Azure Stack includes all Azure Foundational Services which make up the virtual machine compute resource. Virtual machine foundational services can also be related back to the Azure Marketplace. All normal Azure Web and Mobile services and SQL database services can be made available in Azure Stack. It's up to the Azure Stack provider to register the Web and Mobile and SQL database resource providers. As well as virtual machine services, web and mobile services relate back to the Azure Marketplace. The Azure Marketplace in Azure Stack is what you, as the Azure Stack provider, curate. Management of Azure Stack. This topic is very short, as management of Azure Stack is exactly the same as Azure Public. All your normal tooling works with Azure Stack. It's all part of the one single Azure ecosystem. Azure Stack install demo. Azure Stack might seem hard to set up. The behind-the-scenes architecture we looked at before seems massively complicated. However, once we install the base operating system on the single host, it's just a case of kicking off a PowerShell script which installs all of Azure Stack. Just like Azure Public, Azure Stack relies on Azure AD as a directory. At the start of the installation process, we have to sign into Azure AD with an organizational account to add Azure Stack to in order to register Azure Stack in Azure AD. Other than this, the single host restarts itself a few times during the install process. The entire install process takes about 6 hours. This demo shows the install process sped up 10 times the speed. It also shows me logging on again a few times as the server restarts itself. Azure Stack offers and plans. Azure offers and plans are nothing new. They've always been around in Azure. Although as Microsoft themselves is a provider of Azure, they're not really exposed to the public. With Azure Stack, Offers and plans are now exposed, so the provider can offer services to tenants. If we think a tenant is like someone who rents a room in a house, in Azure terms, a tenant is someone who rents space in the cloud. It's fairly straightforward. A tenant subscribes to an offer in which the Azure Stack provider has made available. Microsoft Azure Public has a variety of offers on offer today. Free trials, MSDN Enterprise, pay-as-you-go, etc., etc. Each offer they have has a price per meter, available regions, and quotas. This is how it works in Azure Stack. A user subscribes to an offer, gets a subscription ID, provisions resources with a subscription ID, all meters are admitted with a subscription ID, the commerce system applies dollars to the meter, you send the customer a bill. In the Azure Stack portal, the provider creates offers. Offers contain one or many plans. Plans contain one or many services, such as resource providers. Regions and quotas are set to each service. Quotas are like limits to stop tenants hogging all hardware resources and potentially pulling down all of Azure. That's it. Thanks for watching. This is how you can keep in contact with us. Please follow us on Twitter.